So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. It is a pleasure for all of you to be out there listening to my podcast. It means a lot to me. What I say every week is I am doing this not so much for myself, but for the great people I bring on the show every week. And if you like what you hear, if you are appreciating this podcast, thank you, number one. And number two, share it with your friends. We're building an audience. And that's kind of what it's all about, because I want the people who you hear on a weekly basis to be heard by lots and lots of people. So today is another great day for me. I get to meet and talk with an individual by the name of Kirk Martin. Kirk Martin is a podcaster. He's like me in some ways, kind of,
Kind of.
but he's much more of what I wish I was. But he's a big podcaster. He has a podcast called Calm Parenting. We're going to talk about that. He's been doing it for 10 years. He's also the father of three children, and he is also an influencer. He told me before we got going here today that he has 700,000 people following him on Instagram. That is darn near that's a big army who are logging in frequently to your Instagram. So bravo on that one, Kirk. So without further comments from me, Kirk Martin, welcome to the Hamilton Review.
Dr. Bob, I'm thrilled to be here.
And I'm thrilled to have you. So I think we want to, I like to begin my shows by asking a little bit about you as a person, who you are, a little bit of your background, kind of your story a little bit. And I really want to know why you're doing what you're doing and why you began this whole podcast of Palm. I am obviously dyslexic. Calm parenting, not palm carroting, calm parenting. And I will stop talking because I can't talk anyway. And I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Okay, I'll try to do it briefly. I was raised, like many of us, I was raised by a very authoritarian career military father who kind of only knew my way or the highway, fear and intimidation approach. So when our first son came along, I just did what my dad did, which was yell, scream, use fear and intimidation. Turns out our first son, Casey, is a very strong-willed kid, and it didn't bother him. These kids are kind of fight or flight, so the heart I was like, "I'm gonna double down on this discipline," and then your kids double down, they, like, quadruple down. So that didn't work, and so I started learning how to finally actually control myself because I'd spent the first several years of Casey's life trying to control or change his behavior until I finally got the epiphany, hey, what if instead of trying to change your child, maybe you need to change? And so that was part of the process. And I used to go into his classroom, volunteer quite a bit. And I was always really good with kids, and especially the odd kids. And so I had this idea, and this was way before the podcast. This was 25 years ago. I told my wife, hey, why don't we start inviting these strong willed, nowadays we would call them neurodivergent kids, ADHD kids. Let's just invite them into our home and we'll put some Legos on the floor. They'll come and build with Legos, and we'll teach them impulse control, how to control their emotions. We'll teach them social skills. It was kind of a form of play therapy in a sense. Dr. Bob, we did that, and people started bringing their kids to our house, like kids who had
Well,
severe anxiety, who wouldn't go play soccer, they wouldn't go to see a therapist. They would come and sit on the floor and build Legos with us. And so we did that for a decade, and we had about 1,500 kids in our home. And so we became very
so hold on,
special.
hold on. You had 1,500 children over that decade come to your house.
Over the course of a decade, we had
Wow.
weekday camps. Kids would come over and eat dinner with us, and we'd teach them skills weekends, all summer long. And
Yeah.
so we really focus a lot on the more strong-willed kids. These are really bright kids who tend to be very good at arguing with parents. They don't care about consequences. They're stove touchers. They want to do things the hard way. And I know you meet a lot of people in your profession who are like that. And so And so that was 25 years ago. We did that for a decade, and then we traveled quite a bit. So the podcasting is kind of relatively new, but it's a great way to reach, a lot of frustrated parents who have kids who just won't brush their teeth or go to school or do their homework. So
Okay.
that's kind of the
Yeah.
background.
But I'm curious now, why, are you a psychologist by your training, or was this just you as a human being, as a father saying, you know what, were you volunteering? Was this a something? Was this your business? Or because that is a lot of kids, and that's a lot of Legos. And I can't. I mean, if you divide 1,500 by 10, that's 150 kids a year. How big of a house do you have? I mean,
It was not a big house.
can you break out what you were actually doing? Because I think this is fascinating.
Yeah, so at the time, I am not a psychologist. I don't have a degree. My wife has a degree in clinical. She's a licensed clinical social worker, but she wasn't
Okay.
at the time. This was just born out of our passion for helping kids who are very different, kids who are kind of left out, who are very misunderstood. I was working a full time I was a full-time business guy in the corporate world, but Dr. Bob, I would take my lunch break to go volunteer at my son's in his classroom so he wouldn't keep getting kicked out of school. Partially, right? I was there to, hey, how can I help? But I'm very, probably from my childhood, my dad was abusive. And so I was a third born, and what I learned was how to recognize patterns really well, and I learned to observe because I didn't want to get treated like my two older brothers had. So I was very good at observing. So I would watch these kids who are very different in class, and I was developing odd little techniques and tools for them to sit still longer. It's almost in a way the Hamilton hold, right? The hold that you have for that baby. You through probably all of your experience recognize this and you're like, hey, if I hold this baby at a 45-degree angle this way, it's instantly calming. And so I don't know if there was a lot of research on that, but you intuitively figured that out based on your experience. So what happened was we're volunteering. We open up our home. It was a small townhouse actually, and we just did it on the side. We had no desire to make any money from it, do it as a career. We were like, let's just bring in some kids who feel left out because they couldn't go play sports. They don't do team sports that well. And I
Yeah.
remember this one kid, little kid named Max, and his parents came into our house and said, we've never left Max alone before. He has severe anxiety. And I said, well, the first thing I want you to do is get out of my house. You go up the street to Starbucks. Your son's going to be fine. Because I recognized it was a lot of their own anxiety dumping on their child. And so it was just something we loved doing. And then word spread, right? Because it was weird. Hey, this guy and his wife are bringing kids into the home. Like it was a weird thing, but the kids loved it. And along the way, they didn't know that we were working on impulse control and emotional self regulation because they wouldn't have come if we called it social skills class because you don't have any friends, right? Like, who wants to go to that? But hey, come build with Legos for a few hours. Yeah, I'm up for that. And so it just grew. We had a kid fly in from Finland because they were desperate for help. And we used to take them to the pool. And this guy, lifeguard, called me over. He said, hey, Mr. Martin, is that one of your kids? And the Finland kid was naked because that's how they swim. And I was like, dude, you're in America. You can't do that. So we learned, I would say, Dr. Bob, we probably learned more from these kids than they learned from us because it was 10 to 15 kids at a time. And you know how kids are. If you put a bunch of kids together, they're going to fight. They're going to get upset. We would disappoint them on purpose because these kids don't deal well with disappointment and transitions, just so they would melt down. So we could teach them in the moment how to calm down. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the genesis of all of that. And then eventually
It's
I got
amazing.
fired from my job and did this full time.
Amazing. So you, because that is a very, first of all, I want to recognize and appreciate the fact that this you're just doing this out of the goodness of your heart. God bless you for that. That you were obviously affecting the lives of many young kids, and you're a rare person because most people would run the other way from these kind of kids rather than embrace them and engage them as you did. So you and your wife deserve a star on your crown for that. But and also you say that you learned so much from them. What did you learn from them? Curious.
I learned how to see the world differently. I learned not to see everything as black and white, right? Because these kids, they're such walking dichotomies. They can tell their parents, forgive me for this, but to go yourself, but then
Yeah,
turn around the next minute and they're feeding homeless people, right?
yeah.
They're these incredibly bright kids who at home, when left alone, can build a robot from scratch. But when they're in the classroom, they won't do a simple assignment, and they just see the world in a different way. And it really, look, if you're one of these parents, it's what our son did for me. It completely transformed who I am, because I thought, well, if I just tell him what to do and I'm firm and I follow through, he'll get with the program, because all parents just go right to consequences. But consequences, these kids don't even really care about consequences, because
Yeah.
what they value more is their independence. I'd say their agency, ownership of making their own choices, even if they touch the hot stove. So my son basically changed who I am as a human being, because I had to learn how to, you know what it really was? He made me so uncomfortable because he wasn't a bad kid, but simple things were very difficult. And what I realized in retrospect is I just didn't want to change because I didn't have the tools. I didn't know how to control my own emotions. I needed him to behave so that I could behave. And
Hmm.
so, right, and because that's a lot of times what we're really yelling at our kids is, you need to do exactly what I tell you right now, young man, because if you don't control your behavior, I'm not sure I can control my behavior, and you don't want to see me angry.
Yeah.
That's core of a lot of it, right? So,
That's yeah. I guess I guess the that may be kind of an unspoken message, and that's interesting. So how did your son's name is Casey? Is that correct? Did I
yes,
hear that? Yeah.
yes.
So tell us. So you're saying what did Casey do to you in terms of the changing and how you began to approach parenthood differently?
Well, it was that transition from spending my energy trying to control his behavior to
Yeah.
really getting in and controlling my own anxiety as a parent, because I think that's our number one enemy. We get anxious about our child's behavior and project into the future and think if anybody's listening, they have a middle school age boy. What I always joke about is they're virtually useless. Like, they don't do a lot, right? They sit in a hoodie sweatshirt and play video games. And you get freaked out and think, who's going to marry this child? Who would possibly hire this child? But it's kind of a hibernation phase. But if you give into your anxiety, you will lecture that child endlessly, only point out all the things he or she is not doing well. It doesn't motivate them. You ruin your relationship. And it's no different when, look, school's about to start. Some of you listening have a 5-year-old daughter who's going to preschool. You're getting a call from preschool if she's strong-willed, because she's not going to follow the directions, because she's very, very bright. And when the teacher says, "Oh, you need to do this," that daughter's going to be like, "No, I don't think I'm doing that." And right. And then they won't sit still in circle time, because little kids aren't supposed to sit still, right? Like, it's against nature. And so you're going to get that call and be like, our daughter can't sit still. She doesn't follow directions. A lot of people don't agree with this, which is fine. But I think a lot of what we ask kids to do is just arbitrary. You like nobody, when you're 40, you don't have to sit still in a circle at your office. Nobody's like, hey, Dr. Bob, 3 o'clock in a conference room, circle time, right? Like, you have meetings with your staff while you're moving around and you're drinking coffee and or kombucha because you're in California. But but so I don't know where that question was going, but that's I hopefully I answered that a little bit.
No, you kind of you're hitting on a lot of interesting things because one of the things is you really wonder about the structure of schools and this whole, especially with boys. I mean, girls seem to be a little bit calmer for whatever reason because they're girls, I guess. But I do find that there is a certain um, artificial way that we run schools, and schools, definitely for guys, little boys. Look, I think I must have had some kind of syndrome when I was a kid, the ADHD or something like that, which maybe is persisting into my adulthood. But all that to say is that I was never super duper good at that kind of stuff. I always kind of felt like it was artificial and I didn't like it. And I would have been much happier doing what you're talking about doing, kind of walking around. So it does kind of beg that question. That's not what we want to talk about right now. But um, actually, your thoughts on that. Do you have any thoughts about the way we educate kids?
Yeah, that would take 4 hours. But here are two things I would ask parents to do. One is, as the school starts this year, get a piece of paper and write out a list on the left-hand side. What are the qualities necessary for success in school? Sitting still, following directions, memorizing information for a test, and other things. But on the right-hand side, what are the qualities necessary for success in life? And what our goal was not, especially with our son Casey, we took it from, oh, we want him to have good grades. No, we want to raise a curious child who loves to learn. And most of the strong-willed kids we work with, they're just not good in the kid world. Like you weren't like you were like, hey, just let me put on my white coat. I'm ready to be a doctor now. Like they're very good in the adult world, and they have a very strong kind of BS meter of like, why are we doing this? It's so our frame of reference was we weren't raising a child. We were raising him to be an adult. So we gave our son especially more adult type responsibilities. He wasn't great at like cleaning his room, doing typical kid stuff, but he was always great at doing adult type jobs. And so that's what we focused on. And today he's 31 now, super successful, conscientious, hard worker, all those things. But he was useless as a kid. I like to joke about that, but he kind of was. He just, so I think that's a good frame of reference. Look, if you have a more compliant, easygoing child, they're going to do childhood great. You don't even really have to raise them. They're going to do what the teacher says and everybody's going to love them. And then when they're like 25, they'll finally get fired from a job and they'll wilt like a flower because they've never experienced adversity. But your strong-willed kids are going to be like, I've been fighting life since I came out of the womb, right? And so the arc of life is a little bit different. But yeah, I guess my guidepost for parents this year is determine what you want from your child. Ours was a curious child who loves to learn. And some nights that meant that we didn't do homework, but we did experiments and we played outside because we were learning and fostering curiosity.
Yeah. Did you homeschool any of your children?
We did a mix. We did
Mm.
public school, private school, Montessori, because they said that they're the most flexible, but that's the one we actually had to pull Casey out of because they weren't that flexible. And we homeschooled as well. We did it. We've done kind of
Yeah,
Casey was our guinea pig with doing a little bit of everything.
yeah. Sometimes you have to do that. I think you have to kind of be mindful of what's going on actually at the schools and how they're fitting in. So you started this podcast 10 years ago, Calm Parenting. Tell us about the genesis of that and what you talk about on your show.
So I'd say I divided into two things on the show. One part of it is helping parents learn how to calm themselves down, get control of their own anxiety, control issues, because we as parents have a lot of, but I think 80% of power struggles originate with us as parents. We have so many control issues. Well, I want it done this way. And there's nothing wrong with that, except the strong-willed child will never do things your way. And the more that you care about it, the more they'll resist. And so half of the podcast time is, hey, here's the one I'm working on right now that'll come out next week is next time before you speak, before you say something to your child, whether it's a lecture or reminding them of something, stop for a minute and think, where is this coming from? Is this my own anxiety? Is this my own perfectionism? And deal with yourself first, because once you deal with controlling yourself, man, the kids pick up on that. And I'll tell you the other one, Dr. Bob, I get all the time because I have a feeling you have a lot of men who, hopefully, a lot of men, a lot of dads who listen and watch your podcast. I get all the emails are from moms, always like at midnight, right? Like I always joke, I've never gotten an email from a dad at midnight, like, oh, I'm up late, worried about my child. Because when men go to sleep, we just forget that we have children, but moms never forget, right? It's kind of true. But it's always like 6 paragraphs about a child with anger issues. And then the last paragraph is, oh, by the way, my husband struggles with anger issues. And I'm like, well, that's all I needed to read. Like, your home will change when the dad and the mom learn how to control their own emotions. You can't yell at a child like, you need to calm down, right? And the kid's going to be like, you're 35 and you haven't even mastered that skill, like, and you're yelling at me. So half of it is on us, and then the other part is what we would call giving kids tools to succeed, because behavior charts, they don't work for the strong-willed child because they start the day on yellow anyway, right? And so as soon as they walk in the classroom, they have too much energy, they'll be on red, and so they give up. So I'd rather give kids tools to succeed. And I guess what we're known for is we try to give very practical, even weird tips at times to get kids to go to bed or calm down.
So give me a couple of those tips. What are
Oh,
those tips?
you know what? I'll give you a weird one. So we had all these kids at our home, and they would always get upset. And I noticed a lot of them would lie down on the sofa, on the hard part of the sofa. They'd take the cushions off the sofa, and they'd lay on the hard part of the sofa. And my initial thought back in the day was, weird little kids." But if you observe these kids, they'll tell you everything they need by what they do. And what I recognized was they like the physical, the sensory pressure of it. These are kids who like being in confined spaces. So, 3 quick ones: sleep time. Put them in a sleeping bag. Sometimes put them in a closet and let them sleep in a sleeping bag. That confined space is so comforting for these kids. They often sleep really well. Just don't tell people you're doing it, because people judge you all the time. Oh, your child sleeps in a closet. I don't care, as long as they, right? As long as you sleep, you can sleep outside in a tent.
Yeah.
Second
Well,
thing,
by the way, Kirk, I mean, if you in Southern California, some of these homes in the community, they have walk-in closets the size of the house I grew up in when I was a kid. They're
yes,
900 square feet, walk-in closets. So you could probably put about, your whole family in that darn thing. But anyway, so I sleeping in the closet has a different meaning down here in Southern California.
I bet it does. Okay, second one is homework time. Instead of sitting at the table, what we call the table of death, right? Because that's where the parent stands over the child and badgers them for 45 minutes. I put a blanket over a kitchen table. We have a fort now. Kids love forts. They can go underneath the table. They like being in confined spaces. It's dark. You give them a flashlight, maybe matches, because you can't do matches, but they do their homework underneath the table. And then the third was the really cool one, Dr. Bob. So we had a code word at our home. Whenever kids are getting really upset, I don't like to talk a lot, because talking a lot when kids are upset makes them more angry. And so kids would get upset and I'd say, sofa. And they had a mission attached to that code word, because look, when you're getting upset, it's usually a feeling of a loss of control. And so my first
Yeah.
thing is not to try to calm the child down, it's to give him or her a sense of control. And I often do that by a specific mission. So I'd say, here's your mission: go in the living room, throw all the cushions off my sofa, and lie down on the hard part of the sofa. They would do it. I would walk in, put the cushions on top of them, and I would sit on top of the cushions. And they were instantly calm because, one, it was weird. Two, there was sensory pressure. And three, I wasn't looking them in the eyes when they were upset, because everybody says, look them in the eyes. When people are
Yeah.
upset, they're usually in a little bit of a shame cycle. They just did
Yeah.
something they're embarrassed about. Now I look them in the eyes. So anyway, there's three weird
So
ones.
so so let me untangle that. So you tell them to go in the living room, take off the cushions, lay on the hard part of the sofa, then you come in and you put a cushion on top of them, and then you sit on that. Is that correct?
Yes, with appropriate pressure, of course.
Okay,
Right, I
because
didn't
I was gonna add a 4th reason why they're not, talking or making any noise because they can't breathe, okay? Is that a
no,
But
this
I
is
just throw that out as possible other reason why they're not making any noise, because they are ceasing to breathe at all. But anyway, that's very random, that's interesting. I will tell you that my wife and I have 13 grandchildren. So there are times when by the way, they love to play with pillows and sofa pillows in particular. That is a great thing. We have sofas and they do make forts in our living room with the sofa covers, and that's high, those are wonderful moments of delight. Um, I like your this is a very kind of off the wall recommendations. What do people When people listen to this kind of advice? What do people think? Are people engaging this and doing what you're telling them to do or recommending?
well, I probably don't hear from the ones who don't. So, no, all right. But the podcast keeps growing. So I think what people like is it's doable in the moment. Like even for parents, like how do you calm down? Sit down. Just walk. The next time your kids are fight, here's a fun one. Two kids, three kids are squabbling in the living room. Usually we walk in. You know what? I buy guys all these toys and all these video games. You can't even play well together for 20 minutes. Young lady, you keep quiet. You go to your room. We just bring in all of our own drama. But picture mom or dad walks into the living room, lies down in the middle of the living room floor. The kids will stop fighting because they're going to look at you like, what are you doing? And now I take back control of the situation, not by, see, I can't control another human's behavior, right? You live in a state that tries to do that. Sorry for that comment, but it's true. And you can't control other people's behavior. It's not my goal. But by controlling my own body posture, the kids look up like, what are you doing? Well, I'm just reading this situation because strong-willed child, I know that you need a lot of brain stimulation. You're bored, so you pick on your sister. And when you do that, you just get in trouble. But what I also know about you is you've got a big heart and you really like money. So if you want to come to the kitchen with me and help me with dinner, I bet we could brainstorm 5 different ways for you to earn some money in the neighborhood. And so now instead of just yelling at kids to shut up because they're annoying, which is true, I walked in, I didn't expend any energy. I changed the dynamic and then I taught. And discipline means to teach, it doesn't mean to punish or send to the room. And I taught that kid with that kind of brain, hey, you're going to struggle with boredom your whole life. And so you can either irritate other people to satisfy that boredom, or you can do something constructive, and I'll show you how to do the constructive piece. So, so I think people really like that practical side. And I guess what we hear most is we spent thousands of dollars on therapy that didn't work because most therapists are trained in, well, you just need to give consequences and follow through. Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't work with these kids because they literally don't care.
Do you ever okay, so let me give you an example. You have a kid who is you say don't do XYZ. Don't hit your sister, and they walk over and they slap their sister, and you said, listen, I said don't hit her, and they do it again, and they look you in the eye, and they're basically being defiant. They're looking you and saying, whatever you want, whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the very opposite. How do you deal with those kind of kids who are tough? Because that sense of there's a word that they're saying. You alluded to that word earlier in this podcast, but that's what they're saying to you when you say don't do XYZ, and they just look you in the eye and they do it. What do you do about those kind of kids?
Okay, two things. Proactively, I try to stimulate their brain. What they're really looking for, Dr. Bob, I think is not attention, intense emotional engagement. That's what my son would walk into the room and I would see a glimmer in his eyes, right? They were like, he wanted to argue with me, right? And they're
Yeah.
very, very good at it. And so after I recognize that, I'd be able to say, hey, Casey, I know what you're after right now. You want my intense and emotional engagement. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to the courtroom with you, but we can go do these three things outside or go play guitar. He liked guitar. I'd engage him. when they do I did a podcast, I call it my best podcast of 2024 was on outright refusal when our son was about 11 and I said, "Hey, Case, you need to go out and rake the leaves." And he looked at me like you said, he looked at me and said, "I don't have to." Right? Like pure defiance. And I said, "I'm okay with that. We've just established in our home that we don't have to do things for each other." And I can't tell the whole story, but the next morning he had a hockey game. So when he came downstairs, he's like, "Dad, you've got to take me to the rink. I have a hockey game." I said, "Well, I don't have to." Because we established last night we don't have to do things for each other. And there's a whole story behind this, but I I tend, if it's outright defiance, I'll tell you my usual go-to is odd, it's humility. Because these a lot of times these are fight or flight kids, and the more you double down in kind of an aggressive, kind of overt way, they're kind of getting fed that way, and they'll double down even more. And so I tend to go with a little bit more low key response. I don't give in. That's the hard part, right? Because you've seen this in our society. We went from our parents may have been like too authoritarian, but you hear this with the parents that come in. Now they're way too sweet. Like, honey, baby, I could really use could you do this for me? And so we've gone way too far the other way. And it's basically saying, like, I'm afraid of you, please behave. Our language that I use with strong willed kids is even matter of fact. I talk to a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old, and your 43-year-old, or maybe you're 53. I talk to
I'm like
adults
153.
153. I'm right there with you, but you don't seem like it at all. You're awesome. I talk to them even matter of fact tone. I talk to them like an adult. That kid who just glares at me. At times, I will say, "I know what you're looking for. It's not going to work for you." But I'll give you
Yeah.
quick. Can I give you a quick one? So my son would come at me with a tone, like defiant tone. And you have every right to say, "Young man, if you talk to me like that, you lose X, Y, and Z." That's fine. But what I learned with my son is I would step back. Physically step back and say, "Hey, Case, less 43 times I've heard that tone in your voice," because it was frequent. Because people judge me all the time. "Oh, I wouldn't have let them get past 2 times." I'm like, "You've never had a strong-willed child. They will own you." The toughest guys get owned by 4-year-olds, right? With a strong will. So I would say last few times you've had that tone, I've noticed it's because you are anxious, frustrated, or hungry. So look, you can talk to me that way if you want. It's not going to end well for you. But if you want to grab some chips, I'll grab some salsa. I'll meet you out on the deck and I'll help you with whatever you're struggling with. See, now I'm problem solving. Instead of reacting to his provocation, honestly, I'm not taking it personally. I'm being the grown up and saying, "I've been around the block a few times. There's something else going on here. And if you just want to fight, I hold the ultimate authority in the home, right? We as the parents, we're the authority figures. I can choose to make your life miserable. You can't get your driver's license without me." That's always my trump card if I need it. But I'd rather go the humble route and say, "Something else is going on, teenage daughter." Right? Like I always ask parents, I'm like, if your teenage daughter doesn't have an attitude, something's wrong with her or she's up to something. Right? Like it's like, stop. "I can't believe my teenage daughter has attitude." I'm like, why? It's like the hard part of life, and they're emotional and their whole life is drama. So as a parent, just be the person who doesn't create that constant drama for her. If
Yeah.
you would go and
Yeah.
sit at the kitchen table and start coloring, your teenage daughter will join you at the table coloring and you'll have an amazing talk. But if you put your hands on your hip, "Young lady, you're not going to talk to me like that," she's just going to say, "Just did." And then you're going to fight for 3 days. So,
Um, well, Kirk, you bring. I'm listening to this, and I'm kind of going, "Dang, I wish I would have had this conversation about 20, 30 years ago when I was raising children." Because I did come from the authoritative father. My dad was a military guy too, and
hmm,
he kind of ruled the roost in the same kind of way that maybe your dad did. Um, Although my dad meant well. I mean, I had a
yeah,
wonderful father and loved my father and still do. He wasn't perfect. None of us are perfect. I think that we've all figured that out. Even we are not perfect in our parenting and make plenty of errors. But I think that what you're saying is very profound. I like what you just said in terms of this idea of pulling away with a little bit of a humbleness and a little bit of of approaching it rather from a confrontational type of way. You kind of stop and say, let's let's look at the root cause of why in fact you're doing what you're doing, or what exactly is going on in your life. And I think that most parents, I mean, listen, I don't know, I think that we tend to react, and even as an adult, I find myself reacting to situations. I sometimes embarrass myself by just kind of treating people rudely because of what they did to me, or sometimes people cutting off on the I'm driving, and we drive in LA all the time, so I have great experience of driving, and I tell people frequently there's a reason why I don't drive around with a loaded gun on my seat, because half the people out there would be dead. Okay, uh, tonight on the freeway because they annoy me. But I like what you're saying, and I think that this idea of humility in parenting is something you don't hear very often. It is usually the very opposite. But parenting does humble you. It really does. And the good thing about parenting, and I'm sure this is going to happen. I don't know if you have grandchildren or not, Kirk. Do you have grandchildren yet?
Not yet, but they're coming. I can feel it.
Good, they're coming. That's a blessing. We have 13. And so you do have another shot at it. You get another shot at guiding and leading your kids. You get in terms of your grandchildren. I'm a very different grandfather than I was as a father, I can tell you that. And maybe that's growth, maybe that's just getting tired and older. But all I can say is that I thank God for that second chance, because I think we all in many ways need one. I'm watching our time, and we're gonna. I could talk to you like for hours and hours and hours, because what you're saying fascinates me. I'm wondering, how do people find you?
Just look up the Calm Parenting Podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Our website is celebratecalm.com. But if you look us up, you'll find us kind of online.
Yeah. No, you're pretty easy to find. I have found you, and friends who are listening, his podcasts are awesome. They really are. They're informative, they're unique, they're different, they're fun. Kirk, you're a fun guy. Honestly, I like your style, and I like you're basically very kind of down to earth, and you give advice, maybe a little atypical advice, but I think this is great advice. And certainly I'm learning even as we have this conversation right now. On Instagram, where do people find you?
Calm Parenting Podcast.
Same
So
thing.
you'll
So
see me, Yankees hat and a blue shirt almost always. That's the
yeah, what's the Yankees hat all about?
Okay. We work with oppositional kids. I'm not a Yankees fan. I grew up in Baltimore. I wear it because honestly, it provokes so many people, Dr. Bob. I get so many comments. I can't listen to you because of your hat. And I'm like, okay, so you're easily provoked, right? That's a sure sign you need to work on yourself. We live out west now and we hike a lot. And so if you have a Yankees hat, it either gets go Yankees or Yankees and then bad words afterwards. It just Look, nobody's going to stop you if you have a Colorado Rockies hat, right? Like nobody has an opinion on them. So honestly, this is the strong-willed part of me that just wears the Yankees hat, and I really don't care. It's a hat. But now I'm known
Okay,
for
I'm
it.
just wondering, because you did kind of trigger me. These microaggression is coming right through that screen to me. But
I can
anyway,
feel
I
a little
will.
bit. Are you a Dodgers fan?
I'm actually to put me on the spot here. Yes, I am a Dodger. I live in LA. I've been in LA forever, but I've actually grew up being a San Francisco fan. I'm from Northern California, and my initial when I was a kid, we hated the Dodgers because it
Eh,
was the San Francisco Dodgers, this
Right.
kind of thing. Um, my kids are all serious Dodger fans, and so I have got to kind of adapt, and I have become a Dodgers fan by proxy, I guess you would say. But anyway, yes, I do root for when I go to the Dodgers games. My kids went to the Dodger game last night, and they had a great time. I missed it, unfortunately, but the reality is, when I go to the Dodgers game, I root for the Dodgers. All right, that's how I'd say it. But I'm not an ardent Dodger fan, and apparently you're not an ardent New York Yankee fan either, right? Which cracks me up. Okay, so let's, friends, we're going to end it right here. Find Kirk Martin. He has a lot of good advice. You can find him at Calm Parenting. And Kirk, I'm so honored that you took the time to be on my little podcast today. Thanks.
And I'm honored that you had me on, Dr. Bob. That's awesome. Thank you for the work that you do, by the way. Don't I mean you've helped like thousands and tens of thousands of families over the years. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, friends, we're going to end it there. For all you listening, thank you for tuning into the Hamilton Review today. Until next time, be well. Bye bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.